What's up, YouTube? I'm back from visiting my kids on Thanksgiving break, and I came back to the shop and it is a disaster in here, right? So I want to do some cleaning up, and part of that, I always try to do a little bit of organization when I'm doing that. So some of you may have seen where I got a new toy. I bought the Oneway Easycore Jig for coring bowls, right? And if you have one of those, then you understand the dilemma that I have, and that is the fact that this thing takes up a tremendous amount of space, right? So I wanted to make some kind of holder that I can mount on the wall and get these things stored in a way that are easy to get to, and doesn't take up too much wall space, because as you can see, I don't have a lot of wall space. So let's get right down to it. This is going to be a quick and dirty video. I'm shooting it on my phone, so don't expect to be dazzled by the cinematics, but you might just be impressed with the organization system that I've come up with. All right, let's get to it. Before we get started, these things have a really weird shape. I came up with a couple of different things that were more complicated, but I ended up landing on this system, which you'll see towards the end there that it's pretty simple. So basically what I'm doing here is checking to make sure that laying it out the way I intended is going to allow you to be able to remove one without having to disturb the entire rack, making it easy to get to. So this is the piece that all of the stems will go, the tool posts will go through, and I'm using a pencil here to mark where the centers are. I'm using a square to transfer those to the edge, and then I'll also use that square to roughly find center. I'm using a Voyager drill press, and it has a really neat feature where you can lock the quill down, and that makes it really easy to set the fence. And it also has an onboard computer that does a fantastic job of helping you to pick the right speed for the drill bit that you're using and the materials that you're going to be drilling through. If you haven't seen it before, it's pretty cool. So here I'm drilling a bunch of holes. Not exactly exciting, but I truncated it as best I could. But these holes are going to go all the way through. These are the holes that are going to allow the tool post to pass all the way through this block. Hey, I just wanted to interrupt myself really quickly to say that if you are enjoying this video and find it useful, be sure to click subscribe below. And also click the notification bell so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Back to the action. Just checking the fit here. So now that I've done all that, I'm going to go ahead and check and make sure that everything fits in place and that the swivel action works the way I wanted it to. And it looks like it does. That'll probably make a little bit more sense later. So these, the tool posts fit pretty tightly inside that hole. And I really wanted to make sure that I didn't have a lot of trouble getting it in and out of there. So I brought it over to the spindle sander and just cleaned up the inside just a little bit. I do want a nice tight fit because of the way the weight is distributed on these blades, and I wanted it to sit in the fixture correctly. So now that I've done that, I got to figure out how to store the tool rest portion. So I had some other ideas. I was going to use a pin, use like a 1/8 inch pin, because each one of these have a little hole in the end of it. But I didn't really like that because they kind of swung too much. So I decided I was going to drill some holes, just like I did for the other part. So I went ahead and set these up and made my marks. Then I'm using a square here to get that piece centered on the flat piece that holds the tool posts. And once I do that, then I'm going to go ahead and glue and screw the tool post to the base piece. The reason why I'm doing the glue and the screws, the glue is definitely strong enough to hold this, but I'm going to put the screws in there partially as clamps and secondly as additional support because these things are not light. So now that I have the glue on there, I'm going to use my square to help space it to make sure that it's as centered as possible. I mean, this isn't critical. This isn't a critical feature of the product. And I'm using these SPAC screws that require no pre-drilling, according to the documentation. Looks like it's true. Anyway, using the square again at the other end to make sure that it's as centered as possible. Again, it's not a super critical thing either, so, just for aesthetics mostly. So I'm going to put 4 screws in here to clamp this thing down. The thing is, when you're putting these screws in there, you got to be careful because you don't want to hit those screws as you're drilling the rest of the holes that you're going to need to hold the tool post, as well as the holes you're going to need to mount this to the wall. And now that I have the holes drilled in there, what I really want is I want to put a little bit of an incline on it because I'm going to drill the holes for the tool rests a little bit bigger, a little bit oversized. So I want to put just a little bit of an angle on there. This wedge right here came from a set of table legs that I made, and I had a 10-degree taper on the table legs. So I'm going to glue this shim, which is basically the part that I cut off of the leg, to give me a 10-degree angle on the holes. You want to make sure when you're taping that on, you want to make sure that the wedge extends past the end so that you don't have a spot where your piece hits the table. Just trust me, overhang it on the thin side and you'll be fine. So this went pretty well. I had to shim up the first hole and to keep the drill press from pressing down on it, but other than that, it worked out just fine. Alright, so then I removed my wedge, and those holes all went all the way through as well. So now I'm actually setting a depth gauge so that I can make sure that I don't drill through the bottom piece, because basically this hole right here is just going to provide access for the screw that's going to mount this to the wall. Now, while I'm doing that, I'm going to drill 2 of these holes, but while I'm doing that, I just want to say that you could use this on a French cleat system if you wanted to. I would probably recommend that it had a backer, a plywood backer or something like that, to spread the load. So because this holder is going to be heavy on the one side when you put the blades in it, but you could do it. I'm going to screw this directly into the wall in my case. So these holes right here are basically large countersinks so that I have room to work with the screws when I screw it into the wall. Alright, so here I am putting it up to the wall. I'm going to use 2 3.5-inch screws, and I've measured, I made measurements to make sure that those screws went into the actual French cleat and into the wall. And I put one at the top, one at the bottom. I feel like that's plenty strong enough to hold this up here. And testing it. Seems good. And then I can load up all of my knives and my tool posts, tool rests, I guess they call it. All right. And there goes the tool rest. I wasn't real sure about that. That's why I was jiggling it there. But it's in there pretty deep, and I don't see it coming out of there at all. And it's got a little bit of an angle to it. So here's how the mechanism works. To pull one knife out, you lift up the one from the one that's just above it to swing it out of the way. Pull the knife out, and same thing in reverse. And while this isn't ideal, it'd be nicer if I had it set up where I didn't have to touch any of the others. But the other thing is I want to have, I want to use as little space as possible. But other than that, I really like it. It takes up very little space. It looks nice. And I finally have somewhere to put this thing. So I'm pretty happy about that. Thank you for joining me in the shop today. If you haven't already done so, it'd be great if you'd hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. And get out there in your shops and get some organization done. And remember, dread not and make something. Peace.